You know, people are so viscerally offended, outraged, scared by the things Donald Trump says, the policies he pushes, like a Muslim ban, you know, child separation. No, in no ways am I minimizing it. He's a terrible man, and I think he should be defeated in 2020. That's why we're critical of the Democratic Party, because I don't think you're going to defeat him with the same old, with Hillary Clinton as a man. I mean, that's what Joe Biden is. So, you know, but racism isn't only words. Racism isn't only tweets. Racism isn't only gaffes. Racism is policy. So he said these things in the 1970s. He was on the wrong side of history. Then he pushed the crime bill, which, in fairness, Bernie Sanders voted for the crime bill. But he is on record citing that he is very worried about this potentially creating a mass incarceration system. Then he voted for it because it had provisions in there, the Violence Against Women Act and some other good parts of the crime bill. But he was on record against and predicting. You know, Bernie Sanders has a pattern of predicting things that ultimately happen. He predicted the Iraq War was going to be a disaster that destabilizes the Middle East and creates new terrorism. Well, what was the Iraq War? Just that. He predicted the crime bill was going to usher in an unprecedented cycle of mass incarceration for black men. Well, what ended up happening? So Joe Biden, he said these racist things. Crime bill was racist. I mean, when you're talking about, well, we shouldn't be looking at what made them drive them to crime. We should be looking at, we got to get them off the streets. Well, yeah, that's called white privilege, looking at it that way. You know, and the majority of people that are in jail with the crime bill, nonviolent offenders. That Joe Biden doesn't, you know, good old Joe Biden who took the Amtrak to the Senate, what does he care? And it's very important. It's very important. I don't care what he says now. I care, what does he say? What is he saying when he's not running? Well, what did Joe Biden have to say about the crime bill in 2016? Let's take a look.
Perspectives change over time. Bobby Rush, member of Congress, said the other day, I'm ashamed that I voted for the 94 crime bill. You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all. And in fact, I drafted the bill, as you remember.
I know that.
And by the way, we talk about this mostly in terms of Black Lives Matter. Black lives really do matter. But the problem is institutional racism in America. That's the overarching problem that still exists. And we should be talking about it. And you look at it, the legacy of racism in housing and jobs and so on. So, but having said that, if you take a look at the crime bill, of the money in the crime bill, the vast majority went to reducing sentences, diverting people from going to jail for drug offenses into what I came up with, the drug courts, providing for boot camps instead of sending people to prison so you didn't relearn whatever the bad thing that, you know, got you there in the first place. Put 100,000 cops in the street. When community policing was working, neighborhoods were not only safer, but they were more harmonious. And when the reason why the cops originally opposed my 100,000 cops for this community policing piece is because it's high intensive and it means they got to get out of their cars. So they literally got out of their cars and learned who owned the local drugstore, the local neighborhood bar, whatever. And they were engaged in the neighborhood, which built confidence so that the woman, the African-American woman living in a corner alone where the drug deal's going down in front of her house knows she literally used to have your phone number as a cop.
So I don't know what world Joe Biden is living in, because that's not what happened at all with the crime bill. And, you know, I'm a white dude, so I'm not going to talk as if I know more than African Americans that have been, you know, grossly affected by this in a terrible way. But I interviewed folks in South Carolina during the 2016 campaign. That is not at all what the effects of the crime bill were. You know, just, we put 100 cops, you know, more cops on the street, and they had great relationships with, you know, old ladies having drug deals in front of their house. No, this basically sent mostly young black men to jail over, you know, cocaine or marijuana, nonviolent offenses. That's the crime bill was something to make militarized police and police as an occupying force legal. It went a long way to making that legal. And when Joe Biden tries to equivocate, the problem wasn't this bill. The problem is institutional racism. It's almost like in his mind, those are two separate things. The crime bill is institutional racism. You know, because was there such, is the problem those drug dealers trying to make a living? And I'm not saying all drug dealers are good people, but there's a lot of people who sell drugs to make a living and support their family. Because people like Joe Biden, people like the Clintons, people like Ronald Reagan, people like Art Laffer, people like, fill in the blank, Newt Gingrich, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, Bob Dole, stopped representing working people and started selling all their jobs to other countries. And deindustrialization in this country is what has decimated these communities. When I interview young African-American men in Detroit, they're not out there, selling drugs because that's what they're passionate about. They're not out there selling drugs because, that's what they, as a young boy or girl dreamed of. There's no jobs. There's no opportunities. And the YMCAs, I remember when I was at the Young Turks, I interviewed two young black men from Detroit in front of a closed down YMCA community center. And they told me it's like this in every community. So this institutional racism that Joe Biden thinks is like something different from the crime bill, it's all part of institutional racism. You want to know why? Because for the most part, you have old white men of privilege who had opportunities when they were young, dictating policy and laws and what societal norms are in this country. And it's not, there's exceptions to every rule, because frankly, Bernie Sanders is an old white dude, but he's been on the right side of most of these issues. In some cases, I think he's on the wrong side. I think he's wrong on reparations. I think reparations should happen. And I think it's very simple. Yes, I think each family, I know it's hard to quantify which families were hit, disproportionately negatively affected. I don't even know if you can quantify it like that. And there's also the question of heritage. A lot of people don't know their ancestry because the records were burned and missing. And, that's a complicated thing. But I think not just black people, but Native Americans should be compensated for the land that's been stolen, for the family that's been slaughtered, for kidnapping and all the terrible things. And by the way, money doesn't, eradicate these problems. But that should happen, and I think Bernie Sanders is on the wrong side of that, if I'm telling you the truth. Now, it's fair to say, if you're talking about reparations, I think it's fair to say, well, I don't think that that's the main thing we need to do. A check might help in the short term, but that doesn't change the structural inequalities in our system. But you could do two things at once. You could compensate African Americans, indigenous people, for the sins of America, while also creating a better structural system and opportunity for those classes of people. So I think he's wrong on that. But the point is, Joe Biden doesn't just have a racism problem. Joe Biden doesn't just have a white privilege problem. Joe Biden has a generational problem because he's out of touch with the majority of people. And as I was talking about, that Kamala Harris is mostly like a branding exercise. She's been branded into like for the people. The more I read into her record as California Attorney General, her record as District Attorney in San Francisco, the shit she pulled in that campaign in the to become District Attorney of San Francisco. By the way, Li Fang of The Intercept wrote a great piece about Kamala Harris to become District Attorney in California, in San Francisco, actually took out one of the most progressive district attorneys in the country, who his MO was not, instead of jailing for drug offenses, rehabilitation and, decriminalizing drugs and things like that. And Kamala Harris used it against him as, conviction rates are way down because this guy, I forget his name, he's, being too lenient and letting murderers and drugsters get away with murder and these things. So Kamala Harris, she's for some people, not for everyone. And I think that's going to come out the more that this campaign unfolds. But I think to button this up, what this poll is really showing is what you saw in 2016, but now double. The more people hear Bernie Sanders' message, the more people find out that it's been the same message over and over, the more people see him explain and kind of de-radicalize what has been kind of made into this radical thing. That no, let me tell you what socialism means. It's just human rights. We as a civilized society should not profit off of people's suffering. There should not be a point of entry to get care in America for your health. Everybody should have opportunity for education. What you do with that education is up to you, but everybody should at least have the same starting point. I don't think these have been made into radical concepts by the oligarchy, who doesn't want to sell their yachts, who doesn't want you to have more opportunity, because that means they don't have the same, because they're the ones getting the free lunch. Don't let anyone tell you, well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The bankers have been getting a free buffet for decades. Same thing with Big Pharma. Same thing with fossil fuel industries. Same thing with Silicon Valley. Same thing with real estate.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.